And welcome to everyone to this webinar, which is focused on comprehensive and intersectional approaches and capacity building for the integration of human mobility into NDCs and climate resilient national development planning. This is organized with the PCCB network, SLYCAN Trust, and also UNU. And we have some other organizations as collaborators as well who would be contributing as speakers. So thank you everyone for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you all. I'll just explain the structure of the session. We would have opening remarks first, and we will then have a Mentimeter exercise where my colleague Sajani will be helping out with that. And then we'll have a panel discussion focused on questions which have been shared. I think some of these are already with you who are participating as well. That was just to recap what we'll be doing. So now opening remarks, I would like to invite Mr. Jairo Jacobian, who is a member of the Paris Committee on Capacity Building, to deliver the opening remarks. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So good morning and good afternoon to everyone joining today. My name is Jairo Jacobian. As a member of the Paris Committee of Capacity Building, I would like to welcome you all to this event organized by PCCB Network and SLYCAN Trust in collaboration with the Institute for Environment and Human Security of the United Nations University. I look forward to the discussions on comprehensive and intersectional capacity building approaches for the integration of human mobility into NDCs in the context of climate change and development planning of climate resilient policies on a national level. Before we go into the theme of this event and introduce our panelists, I would like to quickly introduce you to the PCCB. Established at COP21 in 2015, the PCCB seeks to address current and emerging gaps and needs in implementing and further enhancing capacity building in developing countries. The mission of the PCCB is to identify capacity gaps and needs and potential solutions, including enhancing the coherence and coordination of capacity building efforts related to climate change. To support the PCCB's mission and mandate, the committee launched the PCCB network in 2020 as a voluntary association of interested stakeholders engaged in climate-related capacity building. The PCCB network provides a platform to share information on best practices, contributes to the work of PCCB in fulfilling its mandate, and seeks to connect with its peers across sectors and regions. At the moment, the network unites 307 organizations where several areas of capacity building in the context of climate action are addressed among the network members. The PCCB regularly mobilizes the expertise of its network members through events like this, but also at the regional level through PCCB side events at the UNFCCC Regional Climate Weeks, as well as the international level through the Capacity Building Hub at COPs. To learn more about the PCCB network, how to become a member and its collaboration possibilities as a member, follow the link on the chat. Increasingly, climate change has become an underlying driver of human mobility that shapes and alters existing movement patterns or opens new movement corridors around the world. Therefore, it is crucial to understand the multi-causal, multi-directional nature of linkages between different forms of mobility and different impacts of climate change. In this area of implementation, the national determined contributions play a key role in driving and delivering climate ambition. In incorporating human mobility within NDCs, there lies an opportunity to further enhance NDCs, as well as align NDCs with national adaptation plans. But of course, we need to build capacities to be able to carry out such integration. So over the next 2 hours of this webinar, we seek to identify, build and enhance capacities related to the integration of climate-induced human mobility into policy outlooks on national and local planning levels, especially regarding NDCs and its processes. I look forward to the discussions, and once again, on behalf of the committee, would like to thank SLYCAN Trust and United Nations University for collaborating to deliver this event, and as well as all speakers and audience. Back to you, Washita. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jairo, for the introductory comments and the information shared. Now I would like to request all of you to join this Mentimeter, which I hope my colleague could share on the screen, and also share the questions and information. Sajani, are you ready?
Thank you, Ms. Vijayanayak. Hi, everyone. So as Ms. Vasudha mentioned, we do have a Mentimeter for the day. So one of my colleagues will share the link on the chat. Please do click it. It's www.menti.com. And the passcode is 554428887. So the first question is, from which country are you joining us? So please do state your answer so we can know from where you're joining us. So again, the passcode is 554428887. So we see there's Europe. I believe that might be Sri Lanka. Again, we have two joining from Europe. Yes, a lot of joining in from the European continent. We also have people joining in from Asia. So it seems to be predominantly from two areas of the world. Okay, so we'll ask my colleague to, we still have, so we'll just wait for maybe a few seconds and then we'll move to the second question in the Mentimeter. So we also have someone participating from South America as well. Okay, so thank you everyone for the first answering the first question. So we'll move to the second one. So the second question is, how would you rate your level of knowledge and expertise on climate-related human mobility? So we have average and low, very high, high, so we do have, so according to the Mentimeter answers, we do have like a varying degree of levels of knowledge, and I'm perfectly sure today's discussion would benefit everyone in not just sharing experiences and knowledge, but also learning as well. Okay, so in terms of, we do have a lot who say they do have an average knowledge. So thank you everyone. That wraps up our Mentimeter session. So thank you everyone for joining, and hope we have an engaging conversation. Back to you, Ms. Vijayanayak.
Thank you, Sajani. I think we have a range of experience and expertise on the topic joining us today as well, based on what I saw on the Mentimeter results sheet. So it's great that we have different levels of capacities based on our self-judgment and we could learn from each other on what capacities are needed and what needs to happen and experiences we have on the topic. So as I mentioned, there will be 2 questions that we'll be focusing on, and we have 5 panelists and 2, actually 1 who's going to join us in a bit. I'll start with the ones who are here at the moment, and then we can ask the questions from him. That's Professor Mizan Khan when he joins us shortly. So today the panelists are Ms. Anne-Christine Link, who's from the United Nations University, Dr. Sandra Picic, who's from 3 Ideas BV, Mr. Dennis Mumba from SLYCAN Trust, and Dr. Georgia Prati from FAO. So these are the panelists at the moment, and we also have Professor Mizan Khan from ICAD who will be joining us shortly. 2 questions. I will first ask 1 question and request all the panelists to share their insights and provide answers on that question first, and then we'll move to the second one afterwards. So the first question is, what are capacity building needs to ensure climate-related human mobility can be addressed in your sector or a thematic area you work on? So what do we see as capacity needs that are specifically needed to ensure climate-related human mobility can be addressed effectively in the sectors and areas you work in? So I will start with Ms. Anne-Christine Link, and then I'll go to the other panelists afterwards. So Anne, over to you.
Thank you very much, Vasita. I'm really excited to be here at the session today. And if it's okay with everyone, I think I'll just focus on 1 point regarding the capacity building needs. And if I get the chance to answer again and nothing has been said that I've been thought about, I will cover that as well. Since I'm coming from a quantitative background, the first thing that came to my mind has to do with capacity building needs regarding data. So when it comes to climate risk assessments or vulnerability assessments, they can be very, very expensive, and many countries are also not working with the most recent or up-to-date data. And also there are a lot of data gaps due to a lack of infrastructure that we have to keep in mind. Regarding migration, there's also a huge lack of data, especially when it comes to internal migration or to human immobility, which has to do with voluntary or involuntary migration. And there's also little data on the interlinkages between climate change and human mobility and how this is interacting with each other. For the global guide and toolkit UNU, EHS, and FAO worked on, it focused on integrating human mobility from a rural livelihood perspective into NAPs and NDCs. We had many interviews with stakeholders from the government, from CSOs from 7 different countries, which came from Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And here we talked to some stakeholders which weren't aware of interconnections between human mobility and climate change. They said that the main reasons were economic reasons, that people were mainly moving because of work reasons and that they aren't aware of environmental and climatic drivers, for example. And I think this is a huge issue that needs to be addressed and where capacity needs to build on and focus on. I think with that, I would leave it and maybe pass it on to the next person. And if I get the chance to also say something else, I'm happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne-Christine. So maybe I'll quickly go to Dr. Georgia Prati because you work with Anne-Christine on the same kind of work. So would you like to follow up on the same question and answer, building on what maybe Anne said or something completely different?
Sure. Thank you, Vasita, and thank you everyone for inviting FAO to this interesting webinar. I will also keep it short and then maybe come back to some points if there is time. I would like to focus on rural mobility and climate mobility in the context of rural development and rural settings, as this is what concerns the most, or what is closest to FAO's mandate and what FAO does. And so, speaking from the experience that we've had working on climate mobility and migration in general, I would say that it's very important to strengthen the capacities of rural stakeholders on these topics. So on the interlinkages between climate change, migration, and food security and agriculture. From our experience, rural stakeholders have a very low awareness of migration issues in general, and if possible, even less than on climate migration specifically. And I would stress the importance to not only focus on national level, but also local level. And this gap is what we observe many times, especially in the centralized countries. As we deal a lot with agriculture-related issues in the centralized countries, we see that often agriculture, for example, is a devolved function, whereas migration is not. And that's a real obstacle when it comes to addressing agriculture, climate change, and migration issues, also in terms of operations, not just capacities. In terms of capacities at local level, it will be very important to, again, strengthening the capacities of agricultural offices, even extension officers, so that they are aware and able to address issues related to, for example, ensuring agricultural productivity when there is high out-migration of young people from rural areas, and therefore gaps, but also supporting, for example, the family members who remain behind in out-migration in households with migrants that have left. And so put a focus on, for example, the specific needs of women, children, elders, that often are those who remain behind. And those in areas of transit and destination, it would be also important for, again, agricultural stakeholders to be aware of how migration dynamics affect local context in positive and negative ways, and to make sure that they are able and capacitated to integrate and to engage migrant workers in agricultural activities, for example, in trainings and upskilling them also in green jobs, for example, when there are these opportunities. And then a last word is for migration stakeholders as well. I think they need to be sensitized, and awareness has to be raised about the linkages between climate change and food systems, and therefore how this has implications on climate related migration and mobility. So the impacts of climate change on natural resources and rural livelihoods, of course, in the context specific. And I will stop here, and maybe later on I can share some examples of what we have done to address some of these gaps. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now I'll move to Dr. Sandra PC. Would you like to add your suggestions and answers?
Sure. Thank you very much indeed, Foshita, for having me. And thank you, Dennis. I guess I belong to one of these 307 organizations that form PCBC network, and it's really a pleasure to be here. I represent Built Environment. So the capacity building within a climate change and cities in a context of NDCs are of great concern to my day-to-day work. And I was thinking how we can scale down topics that are contained in international treaties that are hugely important, and also at the national level through the NDCs, to the level of individual, to the scale of individual. And I think cities are a very good example to do so, because cities cater for individual people, for individual families, and this is where the action on the ground is happening. Looking very briefly on the DNA of NDCs and cities, obviously is very different. They both share a very different purposes. And ironically, cities resulted as a result of migration at the very, very beginning, 12,000 years ago. So in a way, there are examples that migration can bring prosperity. But because of the scale of the challenges we're facing in climate change, I believe that we cannot afford preferential treatment, favor desertification over floods, or favor mitigation over adaptation. All of these needs to be implemented spatially on the ground. And here, my first recommendation on a capacity building would be through cross-sectorial approaches. In a sense, embracing whole aspects of NDCs, whether it is adaptation or mitigation, or some priorities to do with sectors such as energy or water or any others, and try to implement them all within a territory. So my second point is on territorial integration, which means that healthy rural areas and healthy cities are needed to build climate resilience as well as resilience against migration. So the capacity to think in a context of land use, territories, and regions is hugely important, particularly with the focus on COP27 on Africa and COP28, and going back to my previous speaker on resilient agriculture. This is the key to combat desertification, for example. It is a preventive measure, but above all, when we think about individual resilient architecture, agriculture offers us opportunity for livelihoods, and this is hugely important. So a dream solution for me would be to have a COP climate action program where we discuss land, and within land, we discuss agriculture and cities together on the same day, and maybe this will be a result of a capacity building. And I just have one more point to make, which I believe we need to do, which is building capacities between cities to cities. And the reason why I think is important is because when we look at the trans-Saharan migration routes from Africa, they at some point end up in the Mediterranean with cities that actually are probably fighting with a huge influx of refugees on their own. They do not form part of C40, ICLEI, or Resilient Cities Network. And I think that the capacity building of city-to-city adaptation will be also a good idea. And I would like to end up on this point and hand over to you, Vashita.
Thank you, Sandra. I think we can get to examples in the next round of questions on what you mentioned as well. So now I would request Mr. Dennis Mombal from SLYCAN Trust to add his thoughts on what we just discussed.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you for having me here. Already, I think a lot was said that I would agree with, and I don't want to repeat too much. I liked, I think, the first point that Anne-Christine brought up about the data, and is a very important one. So I would like to expand a tiny bit on that. I think we have a lot of capacity building needs on collecting data, but also on how to understand and identify data that is needed, and how to read the data that is there, and also to build capacities on compiling existing data from different sources and making these connections between different stakeholders, different institutions. So that is the one side, and I think for this also there are capacity building needs on different levels and in different areas. But the other side is to identify the capacities that are needed, like to collect data on capacity gaps, on capacity needs. And that goes to the individual level, where we have to look very closely at like the socio-cultural, the socio-economic context of migrants, of families of migrants staying behind, of host communities, and identify also proactively what are their needs and capacities needed in the midterm, in the long-term future also. if we look at things like planned relocation, or we have risk analysis and risk assessments, we know where displacement and forced migration is likely to occur. So we can already identify capacities that might be needed by different stakeholders in this process. And then, of course, institutional capacities to deal with migration, institutional capacities of like national government entities, but also of private sector stakeholders, of civil society organizations, of community-based organizations, of different, like of women groups, of farmer groups, of fisher associations, of different kinds of entities that will be involved in mobility processes. And also to identify maybe what are the indicators that would enhance resilience, and how can capacities be built to strengthen resilience of communities that will be involved in migration, or either to help them migrate in like safe, orderly, secure, and legal ways, or to stay in place without having to migrate if that's not what they do want to do. So to facilitate voluntary immobility and avoid involuntary immobility, but also to avoid involuntary movement streams. And again, it's very context specific, and there are a lot of cross-cutting intersectional issues. We see this in the research we have done with agricultural communities in Sri Lanka, with labor migrants going from Sri Lanka to Kuwait, with migrants in Niger. So we have to look at their socioeconomic background, but also on things like gender, age, disability, informal employment, specific vulnerabilities, and even like the cultural factors that might contribute to decision-making on mobility, and also to vulnerability factors. And maybe one last thing to connect this again to the whole vertical integration up from the local level to the UNFCCC, and then between different sectors. I think there are a lot of entry points to bring this into the National Adaptation Plan process and the NDCs. For example, under the National Adaptation Plan process, we have a number of identified steps. So some of these are focused on addressing capacity gaps and then building capacities. And that is, of course, first for the national level, but then, of course, it has to go down to the local level to provincial or state level stakeholders and actors, then to district, divisional sector stakeholders, and then also to cities, as Sandra has very brilliantly mentioned, because I think cities have a big role to play when it comes to handling migration streams. And already we see movements on building migrant-friendly cities. And yeah, with that, I maybe would give back the floor to Rosita and I think Professor Khan. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dennis. I just managed to summarize a bit on the capacities that were highlighted by the panelists. So there's a lot of information and needs related to data, capacity-related data, and how data is used. And then there's also this structural element of institutional capacity and the individual's capacity that was highlighted, individual, potentially the vulnerable communities or the practitioners. And then if it's the practitioners, the institutions that relate to it and how that connects. And institutional wise, you have mentioned local, rural, and also national, and then also at different levels of horizontal engagement of capacity building. For example, Sandra mentioned between cities and looking at different organizations working together as well was mentioned. So these are a few things I could gather as the key things that were shared as capacity gaps. Now that Professor Mizan Khan is with us, I hope you can hear us.
Yes, I do.
Yes, great. So we are on the first question. I'll repeat the question to you. Maybe you could add your thoughts to it as well. So we're talking about the capacity needs, or the capacity building needs that will ensure climate-related human mobility can be addressed in your sector or a thematic area you work on. So what kind of capacity needs do we have for better integration of climate-related human mobility into the NDCs, the planning processes, the sector that you work in. So I'll let you add your points before we go to the next one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for inviting me. Yeah, many of the, just in the last minute, I got to hear some of the things have already been discussed. But for human mobility, let me specifically emphasize on one type of capacity building, that is skill development, training for skill development, because if you have skills for livelihood diversification, because human mobility, if you are displaced from one place, you have to move to another place. So if you have skills, then only you can adjust to the new life. So for me, the primary focus on capacity building for addressing human mobility is to impart training for skill development, for livelihood diversification in the new in their new homes, for example, or areas that they move in. So starting from awareness raising to minimum level of education and training are the key. So I wanted, even if we advocate also for human mobility beyond the border. So if you have skills, particularly technical skills, then you can adjust your life in the new place, either within the country or beyond the border. Okay. Over to you, Vasita.
Professor Khan, so thank you very much. Maybe you could take 1 minute, and if the panelists want to respond to anything that you found interesting in what the other panelists mentioned. So if you want to add to it, maybe like a 60-second intervention from each panelist. If you want to add a comment or say something relevant to what others said or what you want to say in addition. I'll start with Anne-Christine, and then I'll pass the mic to the others as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Vasita. I have 2 more points, quick points that I want to make. So first of all, I think it's also important to invest capacity into identifying measures to support migrants, displaced and relocated people, and also people that are immobile, because I think this is very specialized and context-specific knowledge that usually policy and decision makers don't have. Another thing is that there also have to be a focus on addressing non-economic losses and damages regarding migrants, displaced people, and involuntary immobile people, such as the loss of cultural and social connections, and also psychological and mental health issues that are associated with human immobility and mobility. And I think also one thing that we tend to forget about is that, of course, we need capacity to develop a policy such as the NAP or NDC, but there's even more capacity needed to actually implement the document or the process. So I think we should not forget about capacity building of actually implementing a plan or policy. And with that, I would return back to Vasita. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Shall I pass to Georgia now for your additional input?
Yeah, just maybe 2 points. Well, first of all, I really thank you, Sandra, for bringing up the importance of working on territorial development and really on the rural-urban continuum, and again, the importance for stakeholders to come together on these issues. So I really do appreciate that, and I completely agree with you. And the other point is on data, and yeah, I completely agree about the data gap on internal migration. That's something that, for example, at the FAO, on which we insist quite a lot because it's particularly important as related, for example, to seasonal migration that often goes invisible. But I also wanted to stress out the importance to improve our understanding and to generate knowledge on migration as adaptation. And I'm saying that also in the context of rural livelihoods resilience. So really do understand how and in which context and under which conditions a regular migration can positively contribute to climate change adaptation and to strengthen the resilience of rural livelihoods. And I think this piece of information is particularly important in the exercise of capacity building to rural stakeholders, because as I said before, there is generally low awareness about migration and climate mobility even more. But when there is often associated to, to only a negative narrative of migration. And I believe it is important to generate this contextual specific, context-specific knowledge to inform relevant actors about the opportunities that can be seized to really harness the positive contribution of migration under certain conditions to contribute to climate change adaptation, either migrants or migrants themselves in areas of transit and destination, or through social and financial remittances sent back to the rural areas of origin.
Thank you very much. Now I will request Sandra to add additional thoughts if she has any, and then maybe Dennis could come in afterwards.
Thank you, Varshita, and all the panelists for very interesting interventions. Listening to Professor Khan, who spoke so eloquently about the skills, I came to realize that very similar recommendations we would provide on behalf of UN agencies when it comes to rural-urban migration and generally rural poverty. So it brings me to the topic of sort of my general reflection that I have in preparation for this webinar and doing some readings, including the Global Compact for Safe and Orderly Regular Migration, that in fact, sound environmental practices for territories are building resilience to climate change, but at the same time, they are building resilience when it comes to migration and poverty. So whilst we're focusing on a particular group of displaced people, I think that bringing a general issue of environmental stewardship of land, of territories, in a way ticks off all the boxes that we're trying to address, whether it's through NDCs or other ways, our other challenges we're facing. So in essence, sound environmental practices are building cities' resilience and territorial resilience also against migration.
Thank you, Sandra. Dennis, over to you.
Yeah, I also actually wanted to expand on what Professor Khan has brought up, because that's something in our research we have also found that the lack of skills is either like a main factor in migration that is not successful, where migrants do not achieve the objectives they had for the migration, for example, in labor migration, to have a certain income that they can send back as remittances, or it is part of barriers for people to move. They cannot move because they do not have the language skills, the vocational skills, the networks and connections, of course, also, but skills play a big role in this. And so skill building is one of capacity building on employment options, on how to move somewhere else and be able to have the financial literacy, to manage accounts, to have the financial inclusion, to know how to set up a bank account, to know how to navigate a different legal system, and like a different culture and different language have become important factors to determine if mobility is successful or not. And I think what Sandra just said is also an important point, this environmental stewardship, this maybe a skill, also a competency to manage natural resources and to deal with natural ecosystems and the environment as well. So I think the skill building, very holistic skill building, would be very important factor for making mobility successful, or allowing people not to have to be mobile if they do not want to.
Thank you, Dennis. I think there was also the skills related to entrepreneurship that you highlighted, which was common with Professor Khan, and then also economic diversification, which could connect with what was said by FAO as well on food security, where impacts are felt for food sector, on the food sector rather, and then how economic diversification in the food sector could also help, like agriculture being diversified, could also build resilience. We have different areas that have been cited. I think we need to reconvert some of these ideas into what capacities would be needed. I would pass the mic to Professor Khan if you want to add additional thoughts
just
in terms of.
Yeah, thank you, Vasita. My first comment related to capacity building directly for the displaced people. Now I will make a comment on capacity building for people like us, for university teachers, researchers, policymakers, and all. I'm a long-time climate finance negotiator for long years now, also attend the L&D negotiations at the UNFCCC process. You know, for policy development, we need our concerns to be reflected in the NDCs and NAPs, which is not there actually. Out of the 184 NDCs, we have found that about 34 NDCs mention about these human displacement, human mobility issues. So until we reflect them in our national documents, global community will not consider, will not take into consideration. So this is one thing that we need to reflect our concerns in those policies, NAPs, NDCs, ADCOMs, etc. Second is, based on those reflections, we need to build capacity on understanding better problem concept, contextualizing in each and every specific countries, because adaptation issues and vulnerabilities differ from country to country. But primarily, as Sandra has mentioned, primarily vulnerability has got the face from poverty, you know, it's a social construct. It's more of a social construct than geographical location to me. So if the social economic aspects are fine, then people have better adaptive capacity. Even if they migrate somewhere, they are forced to migrate, they can adapt too. So thank you, Vasita.
Thank you very much. So a few more things that got added about the reflection of migration. And I think though we didn't say it in those words, evidence generation, capacity needs for evidence generation on migration to ensure that the component is integrated in different ways, I think. Okay, so we will go to the next question. And that is a request to share examples and good practices for addressing capacity gaps related to human mobility in this context of climate change. So from your work or things that you've seen, what might be the examples you would like to quote about good practices or even a learning process on human mobility in the context of climate change? Shall I start with you, Professor Khan, and then we go to the others?
Thank you again. So in Bangladesh, for example, you can imagine Bangladesh, a country 65 times smaller than America, but housing half of American population. Okay, so, but thanks to our fertility of soil, Bangladesh has got one of the most fertile land on earth, so we can survive. And if there is no climate disaster, yeah, we are self-sufficient in food. But still, human density is the most densely populated country in the world, except Hong Kong and Singapore. They are city-states. You know, we have published a policy piece in the Science magazine last year, about 2,500 words. There we have advocated, we are practicing one model in Bangladesh that we highlighted. It is the climate resilient migrant-friendly towns, because Bangladesh or most of the developing countries are capital-centric countries. You know, Bangladesh is a Dhaka-centric country. So all these displaced people move to Dhaka in search of jobs, and they stay in slums, which is overcrowded already. So our whole strategy is to redirect this inflow of climate refugees away from Dhaka to other satellite towns where governments are now having big investments for infrastructure building, for example. So we are developing a model of climate resilient migrant-friendly towns where we are working with the mayors of those cities, for example, city councillors, and the local parliamentary members, so that those authorities, municipal authorities, develop facilities for accepting them, adjusting them. And Bangladesh government already has adopted a policy in 2019 in Glasgow, it was launched. The policy was launched on addressing this climate displacement. And there, our policy has got kind of a skill development training specifically for those. And we have suggested another model, which some of the countries in the world are experiencing, doing, in fact, implementing, that is selective relocation abroad, and not wholesale immigration. What we, from the negotiating point of view, advocate climate visa for the, because, you know, at international level, there is a protection deficit for the climate refugees, because under 1951 Refugee Convention, climate refugees don't figure in. So even UN Secretary General advocates for a new kind of international outfit to absorb these refugees. But what we have advocated is selective relocation abroad, which we have inserted in our government policy, which is, for example, from the displacement hotspot areas, the 1 or 2 able-bodied young family members, either boys or girls, don't matter, if they can undergo jointly supported institution in Dhaka, for example, and based on the demand from developed countries, because many of the developed countries already have negative population growth rate. So whatever political rhetorics are there, those countries will need young and able-bodied labor force, skilled, trained labor force. They will need it. You know. So based on the predicted demand, for example, from Germany or UK, they can directly come to Bangladesh government. Multilateral process is very cumbersome and very time consuming. So bilaterally, there are examples. Germany, for example, welcomes nurses, trained nurses to their, and they have agreements. So those bilateral agreements can happen very quickly based on the demands, predicted demands in those countries, in developed countries. And this is a win-win option for economic growth in both countries, then for labor market agility, for revenue generation, because these immigrants are better boys than President Trump, who never paid taxes. But these immigrants pay taxes. They are good boys. That is why, in all senses, I never have seen any article which could speak negative of economic migration. Now we need to promote this. This is kind of a responsibility. Adaptation finance is extremely poor because developed countries have assumed the obligatory responsibility, but they are not providing funding. So this is kind of a climate visa, for example, is something which they can support. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
So I'm going to pick one example you mentioned. You mentioned about climate-friendly towns. That as an example, then you also mentioned about the Bangladesh policy on displacement and migration, which was launched in 2019 as part of the Glasgow talks that we had, negotiations we had. And then also potential for scoping potential for economic migration. So I'll go to Dennis now, and then I'll go in the opposite direction of what I went in the first panel.
Yeah, thank you. I quickly wanted to come back to what Professor Khan said, actually not now, but in the round before, about the NDCs. So we did an analysis also now of the newly submitted NDCs, the ones, the updated versions in 2020 to 2022 so far. And so the first round of NDCs, about 20% had some kind of mention of migration and mobility. Now in the analysis, we found that it's up to 39% who have mentioned in some form, like migration, disaster displacement, or planned relocation. Often it's just a mention of like a vulnerability, but in some cases, in a number of cases, also concrete commitments to do something about it. So there seems to be a growing recognition that this is something that needs to be incorporated into the national determined contributions and also into policy processes. But of course, 39% is still like a small number of NDCs overall. It's not even half of all NDCs, and mobility is something that will affect almost all countries, or maybe all countries in some way. But still, so we have there's a trend that seems to be growing. So I just wanted to add that to the mention of NDCs. Yeah, in terms of good practices and examples, So one thing that I have seen happening in some countries is the establishment of like a cross-sectoral, cross-ministerial integrated policymaking process, which I think is a good practice to have some kind of working groups that is cross-cutting across the different sectoral entities and the different national level entities, and build policies based on that. So for example, Sri Lanka has a national migrant health policy that was developed by a cross-ministerial working group and covers migrant health across all sectors. And then from our own work, I would like to maybe talk a bit, that's why I found the vocational skill and the skill part so interesting, about our work on promoting entrepreneurship and building capacities. So we are establishing these climate and innovation hubs in countries at the moment in Sri Lanka and Niger, but we are hoping to expand this further, which are set up to provide like entrepreneurial skills to people in rural areas, to people in underserved areas, and to help set up climate-friendly, sustainable, and ethical entrepreneurship and startups. And that, of course, is something that is very much connected to migration as well, because often migrants are the ones arriving in areas that don't have the skills, or they are in areas and migrate out because they don't have the skills. So having these capacity building hubs helps them to have the support and the enabling environment to set up a business, to economically diversify, and to have a more resilient income base and employment base in these areas, and all the areas that migrants move to. So I think I would like to highlight that as a good practice, and hopefully one that we can further scale up and expand across different countries. And maybe now I'll hand over to the other speakers.
Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you, thank you, Dennis. Okay, go ahead. I was wondering whether I was speaking or you were speaking. Oh, good, Sandy, you could take over.
Thank you. Sorry, apologies. On good examples, I wanted to talk a little bit about human ingenuity. So about good examples that are driven by good ideas and goodwill, though we rely on technology a lot, but maybe there are some examples of human ingenuity that might be of inspiration. And my first example goes back to United Arab Emirates, where we're going to have a COP28 and the Gulf cities, because in fact, migration and economic migration is not a new phenomenon. It was there for probably over 500 years, in the Gulf cities for around 200 years. And there, a system of accommodating migrants was that the city would allocate a land outside the city areas, in peri-urban areas, we would call it peri-urban right now. And this is where the migrants from Iran, for example, will be given a land, will be given a home, and they would build that home from obviously eco-materials. It was a bio home. But that provision of land for your own home and some agricultural productivity, in a way, was automatically a provision of a livelihood. So this is a very simple, I think, workable solution for the migration, even until today, where we actually growing that separation between cities and rural areas. And we have some historical examples whereby a provision of land and agriculture can offer livelihood strategies for new people, new arrivals to the cities. The second example is from Europe, a very interesting program of Horizon 22 called Ruratage. And I like Ruratage program because it involves culture in rural areas and also in urban areas, and generally thinking about cultural landscapes. And there are very nice case studies from Asti province in Italy, which is a northwest Turin area, whereby rural areas that are depopulated welcome migrants, and community hubs were created in derelict buildings, for example, that at the same time got restored, and the integration, social, economic, and cultural integration of migrants took place, and refugees. So these are really nice examples where the populated rural areas embrace migration and create prosperity for the future with this additional workforce. And my third example is from Poland, generally Eastern Bloc countries that are right now embracing migration from the Ukraine because of the current war between Russia and the Ukraine. And Poland alone has taken over 3 million migrants to their homes. People took migrants to their homes. So the country managed to mitigate the migration problem without building refugees camp, but in fact, it was simply ingenuity of the people that embrace these huge number of people in a very dignified way. So thank you over, and I can hand over probably to Georgia.
Yes, thank you, Sandra. Georgia, would you like to take it up?
Yeah, thank you. So maybe I can start with giving the example that was mentioned already, coming from the collaboration between FAO and UNU, which is a guidance tool and toolkit that we've been developing on mainstreaming human mobility into NAPs and NDCs. And this is precisely aims to strengthen the capacities of the actors involved in the NAPs and NDCs processes, being government representatives or practitioners or other type of stakeholders. And on this, maybe I would like to a reflection that was a thought that I had while during this discussion is that NAPs should be, from a point of view, also an opportunity to build capacities, not just a consultant-led process. And I think that opportunity should really be seized. Moving to another example at country level, in Zimbabwe, FAO is implementing a project on migration and climate change. And in the context of this project, we are conducting a series of capacity development workshops with national and local stakeholders that draw on a study that we also conducted in the country. So they are evidence-based. And the aim is, it was mentioned before, and I believe it's a very important point, intersectoral collaboration and policy coherence. So we are bringing together agriculture, rural development, climate change, and migration stakeholders. So it's an opportunity to raise awareness about context-specific dynamics when it comes to climate mobility, but also to initiate that very important dialogue that often is missing. Leaving the place to silos thinking and silos policy making. And also in Zimbabwe, we are collaborating with another project that is also implemented by FAO on green jobs generation, and this is linked to what was already discussed about upskilling people, upskilling youth. In this particular case, the focus is youth, so building capacities of youth in climate vulnerable areas in green sectors, and promoting green agripreneurship. So that's also something that we are doing, and also trying to integrate these considerations into national employment programs, and not only in Zimbabwe but also in other countries in Africa and in Asia. And maybe the last example could be that of, so we are organizing a sub-regional workshop in Southern Africa on climate change and human mobility at the end of November. The aim again is to foster intersectoral collaboration and policy dialogue, bringing together different types of stakeholders from different sectors. But also I'm mentioning this example because I think it's very relevant in the context of facilitating regular migration again, in the context of climate change, which is very important, and is a point that has been reiterated also after the latest International Migration Review Forum. So we're talking about cross-border migration, intra-regional migration, particularly important if we think about, for example, cross-border pastoral mobility in the context of climate change, that we know is a controversial issue, but it really deserves attention. And I'll end it here.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And Christine.
Yes, thank you very much, Vasita. I have two examples that I would like to present, one from Fiji and one from Nepal. The first one has to do with how a country can deal with limited human and financial resources when, for example, developing an app, because this is actually what Fiji was experiencing when they were developing their app. But what they did was trying to make the best use of the local research resources that they had in place, for example, by collaborating with local universities and local research organizations, as well as NGOs. I think there's often the case that ministries and governments work in silos and don't really like to open up to other opportunities. But in the end, actually both sides can benefit from collaborations. Another thing that they did was having extensive stakeholder consultations, as well as a stocktake of existing policies to see whether there's anything that they can draw out from those existing policies and place it into the NAP. So there's often no need to actually reinvent the wheel. And in the end, they came up with a very comprehensive NAP. Unfortunately, they did not have the resources to place a specific focus on human mobility, but instead of just neglecting the issue because they don't have the resources, they stated in their NAP that human mobility needs to be addressed. And this was a way for holding themselves accountable as well as responsible to address this in the near future. And this is exactly what Fiji did. They applied for funding and actually got the funding from the German government. And with the support of experts on human mobility and climate change, they were able to then develop guidelines on both relocation and displacement. Another example I want to present here is from Nepal. We often talked about vertical integration in this session today, and Nepal is very good or trying to address vertical integration by focusing on LAPAs. LAPAs are local adaptation plans for actions that evolved from the national adaptation plans. And here they are trying to connect the local to the national level, because we often have those national policies or national plans that are developed and designed at the national level, but in the end, it has to be implemented by the local level. So there's often a disconnect between the national and the local level. And for example, through LAPAs, what Nepal is doing, we connect those two entities and bridge this disconnect. Yes, with that, I would like to end it here. Thank you, Vasita.
Thank you to all the panelists. While you were giving examples, I picked on a few of the capacity needs that could be potentially relevant. One is the finance need to address human mobility through the NDCs and the NAPs. So that Fiji example is something that we could build on. And I think also 1 or 2, the NDC has a detailed component on human mobility. So that could potentially be a good example of actual integration of human mobility into NDCs, I think. And then this local and national aspect of the need to address at a local and national level, that could potentially connect with the intersectoral committees that are set up, being vertical and horizontal, and then potentially looking at funding mechanisms through proposals that could be cross-sectoral. Though we didn't talk about the finance needs and capacities and support, I think there's always something like elephant in the room. We have it always in the back of our minds. So that potentially could be something we could look at. Okay, so I have taken too much time, is what I see from the agenda, but we could take another 5 minutes if there are any questions or comments from the participants. If you have anything that you would like to add and ask a question, please type it in the chat box and I would relay to the panelists if you would like to ask any questions. If anyone would like to say anything, please add to the chat box that is recorded. If we've missed any capacity needs, if we've missed any examples, please do add as well. Okay, until any questions, again, I'll ask for like a 1-minute intervention from the speakers, like 60-second intervention. That means 5 minutes will be taken. But whether you would like to add anything on examples that you've heard of or build on what others have told. And Christine, do you want to add if you have anything else to add or any comments?
At the moment, I don't think I have anything to ask. I'm still processing all the great examples that everyone was giving. So I'm looking forward to, yeah, still disentangle everything that was just said. Thank you.
Any other speaker who would like to say or add anything? Sandra, do you want to add any specific things to what was said, Dennis or Georgie?
Yeah, maybe just one more of a meta thing, really. But I think this and also 2 weeks ago we had this workshop series on human mobility and climate change. It really highlights the importance of for capacity building and identifying capacity needs of the knowledge exchange between different parties, and also of then building like collaborations and multi-actor partnerships. And this is something in all areas of our work that we found super important to have these to have the exchange between like different agencies, different entities, and different stakeholder groups. And again, we had this workshop series over 4 days, and every day I think we had a lot of inputs. Some, of course, that we already have seen, but others we wouldn't have thought of. And I think today I have already taken down a lot of notes. So I think this is an important prerequisite and also enabler for more capacity building. And, yeah.
Thank you, Dennis. If none of the speakers have any additional comments, I would open the discussion component of this webinar. Professor Khan, you want to add anything? I see you on the screen. Okay, I guess not. So we'll start the discussion in breakout groups where we will address the same questions. And then we'll have a reporting back session based on the inputs that are gathered in the discussion. One thing I wanted to highlight is the component of human immobility, because we talk about a lot of mobility, but this is also highlighted by, I think, Anne-Christine, and in our sessions we had on climate change during the last weeks, this has become also a key component. So looking at this element in planning and gaps and needs to be addressed, capacity needs of those who are not able to move from an area, how to address that would also be discussed, hopefully. So I'll request our logistics team to divide the groups, divide the participants into 2 groups, and we'll discuss in the groups, and we'll come back in 30 minutes.
That we're going to use. So I think Chalani, you would be the one, right? I'll hand over to you.
Hi, Dennis. Am I audible? Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Thank you. So I'm now putting the link to the chat box. You can access the Miro board from that link. Just if you can follow the Miro board link, there's 3 questions you have to answer. So in the left side corner, there's a sticky note mark. You can take one sticky note from that and put your answers here. Like
yes. Thank you, Chalani.
And if you are unable to write, please put your inputs in the chat box. We can add them into the Miro board.
Okay, thank you very much, Chalani. Yeah, I think with this we can open the floor. It's the same. It's basically the same 2 questions that we already had for the panelists, but now it's everyone else's opportunity to provide any inputs. What do you think are capacity building needs, and also if you have any good practices from your work or from any thematic areas you have heard of, from research, from anything you are involved in your organization or in your capacity as someone interested or working on climate change and mobility. And yeah, I would open the floor. I don't want to talk too much because I already gave my inputs. So maybe someone else could go first. You're welcome to put it directly onto the Miro board or into the chat, but also please, I mean, it's a small group, there are 9 people only, so please feel free to unmute yourself and give us your opinion.
Dennis, maybe as a little icebreaker, we can all quickly introduce ourselves. I think it's always nice to know who you are, what you're currently working on, and what your interests are. So maybe that helps to get the discussion going. I think you guys know who Dennis and I are. Maybe you can quickly, oh, there's the first hand up, amazing.
Okay, can I speak? Can you hear me? Okay, thanks. So hello, this is Jin Tanaka. I'm from Japan. I'm also the member of the UNEP NDCs major group for children and youth. And yes, and also the last time I was into the PCCB networks. And this time I'd like to answer to the first question for the blue zones. Is kind of the, maybe it's better to work on for the focusing to the some cross sectors, likewise industries or likewise to some of the public sectors and so on. So yeah, likewise it's more lean to infrastructures. Like we call it the green infrastructure in Asia countries. So that's my topics. Thanks so much. And can you show me the links? Maybe I could not see it. Sorry for the inconvenience. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Then anyone else would like to introduce yourself? Damroa, maybe? You can unmute yourself and quickly introduce yourself.
Hello, I am Damruan. I am working at the entrepreneurial side. I think the gaps we should eradicate during the human mobility regarding the agricultural sector. When we go into the rural and suburban area, they are searching for the infrastructure, especially on water and other related infrastructure availability, unless they cannot go for the production side. So when we build up good water systems and other infrastructure during that area, we can mitigate the human mobility within that area. So it's over to you.
Thank you. Maria, would you like to quickly introduce yourself?
Good thing I am older. I use my middle name because in the Philippines there's a lot of Maria, but I work for the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities. I work on urban transitions. I think one of the capacity building needs is to climate-related human mobility would be how do we build also the capacities of local government units, be it rapid onset event or slow onset event, receiving cities, and those hosting communities. It's always an issue and always a challenge for local government units to really absorb what could be the process as to how, and how do they ensure that they also respect it, especially if it's migrants coming from other countries, but also for other communities as well. I could not speak on behalf of the Philippines because mostly the migration is outward migration, mainly because of economic pool, but of other countries. But climate and the connections as to climate and migration, out migration, there can be part of the driving forces as well. But at the same time, looking at experience, for example, I'm thinking of Thailand as part of the bigger Mekong that hosts migrants coming from the borders of the Mekong, greatly affected by whatever climate induced risks that region brings. The other capacity building that I would like to point out is that I think what we can actually draw from the experience of humanitarian process. How because what I've been missing is how rights, especially of the most vulnerable sectors, women, persons with disabilities, are safeguarded in this. There are existing mechanisms that are being placed, but from the bigger view, I think bigger perspective, I'm looking at perhaps the appreciation capacity to also appreciate and integrate climate into the broader and human mobility associated with climate into the broader development paradigms and directions. That in itself, it's a long capacity need. And I think that's also to address the siloed approach, looking at NDC now, the assessment that one of the speakers mentioned.
Thank you. The connection is not super clear, but I think I got most of the points, and I think we're already putting some on the Miro board. But if anything we have missed, please feel free to put it in the chat or the Miro board yourself. But I think the main points are well taken. So we already have a good like a range of the whole Asia region, from Sri Lanka to Philippines to Japan. And we have 2 more people in the group. Maybe you would also like to quickly introduce yourself. So we have Nuhaila and San. And I apologize for any mispronunciation. Would you like to quickly introduce yourself? Okay, that doesn't seem to be the case. Nuhaila, Sanwin, if you are on the call, if you can hear me, and if you are in the position to unmute, please do. We would love to hear from you. But otherwise, of course, you are free to put on the Miro board in the chat. Okay. Yes, please. Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Oh, okay. My name is Sanwin, Director of the Climate Change Division under the Environmental Conservation Department, and also under the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environmental Conservation, Myanmar. So nice to meet you all. I'm mainly responsible for the climate change matter. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for joining us. It's great to have you, and be very interested to hear from your side any experiences, what you think related to capacity building needs and climate related to mobility. Is there anything you think would be a big need for capacity building when it comes to this from your perspective?
Okay, so regarding my experience in development of our NDC submitted to UNTPC in 2021, so the capacity building is a major requirement for us. So particularly when we when we make greenhouse gas inventory and the data collection and the coordination among the different line ministries and NGOs and civil society, something like that. So in this matter, we need to have capacity building. Yes. Oh, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
All right, so then I would open the floor again for anyone who would like to expand on any of these. So do you have any examples of good practices or any other needs that are not mentioned, that have not been mentioned by the panel, maybe something we overlooked for addressing human mobility in the context of climate change in any sector, any area, any level? And of course, Anne-Christine or Professor Khan, if you want to add anything, yeah, we didn't have the time earlier, you're also free to do that, of course.
Hi, Dennis. I'm from SLYCAN Trust. I'm Shalini. So I would like to add the inputs in the perspective of youth. So I think in terms of capacity building needs, it is important to youth to have that education about the climate related human mobility from their school education and how to respond to that the risk, and also alternative livelihood, because the human mobility, climate related human mobility has a greater impact on with their livelihood. So if they can have capacity building related to alternative livelihoods, it will also helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Shalini. That's actually something maybe we didn't discuss as much as we should have, like the youth perspective on climate-related mobility and what are the capacity building needs for youth. And yeah, Jin, that might be your keyword. Yes. Go.
Okay, thanks so much. I also work into some of the company who is the kind of some trading, importing and exporting some food. And that time, I think we need to concern about the food consumptions. We strongly related onto the capacity buildings and related on the climate issues. We are like bring to the many local areas. We are using to some trucks or ships or trains and something like that. So maybe it's better to concerning about to the some food kind of some food consumption in local areas, local making and local consumptions. Also, I like to add to the climate education in school. Likewise, to the most of the schools would like to eager to know and eager to tell to the next generations to know about what's the issues and what's the crisis on the climate change. So that's the 2 points I like to add it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think this goes for school education, but probably also for university education, vocational training, and then capacity building and skill training programs at different institutions, for example, in the public sector, but also in the private sector. I have a request from the other breakout group, if we can send over one more person. Would anyone like to join the other breakout group?
I can go and move to the other breakout room, if that helps.
I think the issue they're trying to solve is that they have too many panelists and too little participants. So I think it's, thank you for volunteering, but probably someone else if possible. Damoran, would you be okay to go to the other group and see what is happening there? Not sure if he's still with us. Otherwise, it's okay. I guess they will manage. So, any other inputs for this year? We have now what do we have? Green infrastructure, climate education in school, socializing experiences, humanitarian sector, the agriculture sector, climate education, alternative livelihoods. Yes, Damoran, please.
Hello, everyone. I would like to add a point on the capacity building need to ensure the climate-related human mobility regarding the agricultural sector. When we go into the agriculture sector, most of the farmers are dependent on the primary income. So introduction of secondary income instead of primary income, let's say going into the agriculture sector, mainly they don't have the sufficient amount of the financing for the development of their sectors. So when we introduce the secondary income source, addition to the primary income, they can ensure their sustainability within their within the sectors of them, and also that will ensure their livelihood and ensure the food safety and all other basic requirement within the day-to-day life. So that's the point I have highlighted during the agricultural sector. So it's over to you, Dennis.
Thank you. I think this definitely applies to the agricultural sector, but also maybe to some other sectors as well. But it's a good point. So we have filled up, I think, the first part of my report, at least a bit, with different elements. What about the second one? Any good examples, anything that stands out that you have heard of, have been involved in, have studied? Any country, any sector that does a good job in building capacities or addressing capacity gaps? So we have 5 more minutes, I think, for the breakout group. So now is the chance to put anything on the board, any inputs. We have people from, we have Sri Lanka, we have Philippines, we have Myanmar, we have Japan, we have, of course, people who have worked in the Pccp process. So anything from any of these where you think it's a good job being done that has worked well, or even something that hasn't worked well that you think could be expanded on to work better?
Yes, please, Maria, go ahead.
If you talk, Maria, we cannot hear you. You're muted now, I think.
Sorry. I couldn't think of a good practice in the region, in our region, that is directly related to climate change, but except for the experience that was earlier shared by. But one, perhaps in terms of policies that we can make use of is that there are already policy frameworks that addresses some of the facets of human mobility. For example, but it is not necessarily climate change, and I think that's one of the aspects that we might have to explore as well, because it can be used as a framework to start on in terms of approaching policies, for example, on protection, especially on migrant rights, especially for the displaced and those who migrating out of economic resource base heavily affected by climate change. ASEAN has framework around it. Same goes with food mechanism in terms of disasters. One that can be used, no? As I've mentioned earlier, perhaps we can look at some of the examples in humanitarian, how the humanitarian sector has kind of set up. Not necessarily reinventing the wheel, but at the same time, useful. How do we explore it further? So I couldn't, I'm sorry, I couldn't fill up because I couldn't think of a specific example of climate change. On the data, for the lack of data on mobility, how mobility was affected, I think in absence of government data, we made use of the Google mobility on such, just to look at the snapshot during the COVID-19 pandemic. It would be good. That's something that perhaps an open source similar effort can be further explored. I'm so aware of an effort, but it's something that local researchers can as well collaborate, just to also fast track understanding and addressing the data needs.
Thank you. I think so. Something we are planning to do as SLYCAN Trust is to compile and find case studies of good practices and examples. And I know there are some out there, some of course ones that are heavily discussed, but I think, I mean, there are many countries and other entities, for example, cities working on this issue. And as our analysis of the NDCs and labs has found, there's a higher number now that have incorporated this. So to identify what has worked, we feel is very important, and to collect these case studies and compile them. Sorry, and Christine, please.
Yeah, thank you, Dennis. I also wanted to present a good practice from Uganda, because I think that the COVID crisis actually pushed countries to address certain capacity needs, for example, digitalization. So they were forced to invest in, for example, digitalization when they actually wanted to ensure horizontal integration and ensure that people were, for example, integrated in the NDC process, because they, for example, invested in digitalization to ensure a hybrid mode, or so they had online workshops. They also had in-person workshops with CSOs and other ministries, and that was really important for them to actually connect with people that are important to be engaged in the process.
Thank you. Okay, we have 48 seconds. This is very interesting. I think something similar could be seen in Sri Lanka as well during the last years, that there has been, especially in the food systems and the agriculture sector, a lot of forced digitalization. And now this, I think many people are keeping with it because it actually pays off in many ways. And I think even without COVID, it would be possible to do this in places. And to further build on that, now that the kind of infrastructure is there, it can be used also for other purposes than just avoiding COVID restrictions. Okay, we have 5 more seconds. I'll see you all in the main group. Thank you very much.
I hope everyone is ready for reporting. from the discussions. Can I start with the group that I wasn't in? I forget the numbers. Group number one, reporting back for you.
You're still muted, Dennis.
Oh, apologies. Yeah, sorry, I was asking Chalani to share the Miro board, even though I was muted. Apparently she has understood. Yeah, so in our group, we had a discussion mainly on the first question, the capacity building needs. And I mean, a lot of what was said already in the panel discussion, so we didn't go into too much detail on that. One aspect that came up was the aspect of youth and also of the education system, and how like education on climate change, but also on mobility and capacity building on mobility could and should be incorporated into the education system, into school curricula, and then also into vocational training, into capacity building at different institutions, and into higher learning. And then we talked about green infrastructure and like the different factors that contribute to mobility, for example, secondary and primary incomes in the agriculture sector and rural areas, alternative livelihood options, then the green infrastructure and the available infrastructure potential to build infrastructure. And for example, here we have in the agriculture sector unavailability of proper infrastructure, for example, for water in some countries. So we had participants from mostly the Asia region. We had from Philippines, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Japan, so all across the Asian region. And again, youth, education, enabling environment and infrastructure, and then also the building of institutional capacities on vertical and horizontal integration and coordination, and getting different expertise and experiences and data from stakeholders, but also from like the humanitarian sector and from other countries, and to have a South-South exchange between Global South countries and make sure that processes are inclusive, especially for people from developing countries in the Global South. And for the second question, actually, we had difficulties coming up with a lot of examples. We talked about some, but what we talked about a lot is actually the need to compile more of these good practices and examples and compile the work of local researchers and practitioners, and to build an open source database of this, and then to have a way to analyze what is working, what isn't working, and what can be replicated elsewhere or scaled up. And we had some case studies, for example, in some countries, COVID has forced countries to invest in digitalization to ensure integration of different processes and integration of people. And that also can pay off in other ways than the original intention. For example, in terms of managing human mobility and collecting data on human mobility, and enabling migrants to participate in processes remotely, and to connect different people, different stakeholder groups through online workshops, online education. So yeah, again, it's a big need to really identify what has worked, to identify impact and success of different interventions and policies, and then maybe build a database of this, and have a way for countries to and other organizations to check these and identify what is working and what they can maybe incorporate into their own processes. So that's from group one, unless someone else from the group wants to add anything. And thank you all for your activity.
If there aren't any additions from group one participants and members, I would like to request Johnny to maybe provide a summary of what group two discussed.
Sorry, everyone. We seem to be having a bit of technical difficulties today. Thirin, if you could share the Miro board. So please do give me a minute. So under the first question, we spoke about strengthening the capacities to address gaps related to internal migration, especially in terms of institutional capacities. It was suggested that
was rather highlighted that when it comes to statistics and collecting those, there's a need for building capacity. There's also reasons in climate-related human mobility in the local level. Also, vertical coherence was also highlighted. Again, it was also suggested strengthening livelihood in terms of climate vulnerabilities as well. Another few key points that were highlighted were the institutional capacities of enhancement to integrate policy processes to the framework, and technical needs and financial capacity building, as well as enhancing awareness of immobility as one of the outcomes of the impacts of climate change to inform policy making. It was also, we also spoke about capacity building at community level through radio programs and support listening clubs, and enhance the possibilities of engaging in climate-related research. And finally, capacity to engage migrants in green sectors, including upskilling them to contribute to greening of agricultural value chains. So with regard to good practices and for addressing capacity gaps, a few case studies did come into the discussion when we were having that. The case study on economic migration and climate impacts, for example, the case study on Kuwait and migrant workers. One thing that was highlighted was that even though like at the moment, even though data is not properly processed, there is a link between sort of environment related issue together with economic issues as well. And the Kenya case study on the informal settlements also found a certain link between food security and human mobility. It also focused on youth and what sort of drivers there are for migration to and out of informal settlements in Kenya. We also had example of migrants from Indonesia that received trainings to work in greening palm oil value chain in Malaysia, and also a youth partnership on climate and disaster risk management was also included. And another program was the SAFE program, which sort of focuses on skilling refugees and internally displaced persons to sustainably use natural resources and improve access to energy as well. And we did receive a few more inputs. Youth groups set up on human mobility under one of the UN entities. I believe it's interlinked with some way of ensuring we could address capacity gaps as well in both senses. Mitigation of environmental degradation, enhancing the capacity on climate migration, and finally strengthening the livelihood and strengthening natural resource management of those who are moving as well. So those were some of the things that we spoke during our discussion. So if any member would like to add any more, if I have missed out, or if you want to clarify any points that I've pointed out, please feel free to. Thank you.
Thank you, Sujani. I think we would also be able to share the Miro link with others who are in the list of people who are initially there and who are not at the participants list at the moment, because I think we had more people in the opening session. So we could send the link to them and ask them to add their inputs as well. So I would now request anyone else who would like to add any comments. If you would like to add any comments, please do by adding into the chat box, or by raising your hand. I can give you the mic and then give you the floor to speak. So anyone who would like to add anything, any clarifications, any additional points before we request Ms. Riddhi Datta from the PCCB to speak. So there's 2 minutes to anyone else who wants to add anything. If not, we move to the introduction to PCCB network, which is done by Ms. Riddhi Datta from the PCCB network. Riddhi, over to you.
Hi, Vasita. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having us. So yeah, just to quickly introduce myself, my name is Riddhi, and I support the work of the Capacity Building Subdivision at the UN Climate Change Secretariat. As the subdivision, what we do is support the constituted body. You heard from Jairo, he's a member of that constituted body called the Paris Committee on Capacity Building. So the PCCB has its network, the PCB network, and as we have seen over the conversations in the panel before and throughout this entire fantastic event, we have engaged with a lot of PCB network members, and events like these goes to show exactly what we seek to do with the network to connect organizations, entities across sectors and regions, as long as they have the focus on capacity building. I was a part of the main panel. I mean, I listened in on the main panel, and it was really interesting to see all of the discussions that came out of it and sort of get an idea of what came out of the breakout groups as well. But just to give you and recall what the PCB network is, it's a voluntary association of interested stakeholders. So any organizations, entities, as long as you have a focus on capacity building, you're welcome to join the network. We'll drop all of the relevant links in the chat. But besides that, I also wanted to take the opportunity to thank SLYCAN Trust and UNU on collaborating on this event, and also all of the speakers. And I see a lot of our speakers are also from, our members list. So yeah, thank you so much for joining, and our audience as well. At the same time, I'd also like to draw your attention to the Capacity Building Hub, that is PCCB's flagship mandated event at every COP. So we had the 3rd Capacity Building Hub, where actually SLYCAN Trust was one of our lead partners for one of our thematic days. At the 4th Capacity Building Hub, which would happen at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, the call for expression of interest to organize an event under the umbrella of the hub is still open. We have one more day, so the deadline is tomorrow. So if you or your organization is interested in organizing your capacity building event under the hub, please do submit your activity. All the links are in the chat. But besides that, what we would also like to, sort of invite everyone to is the UN Climate Change Capacity Building LinkedIn group, because that's a space which we constantly use to do outreach for all of PCCB networks, events, the hubs, and everything that the convention does around capacity building. So we do welcome everyone to join us on the LinkedIn group and stay updated with all of our work. But yeah, with that, I'd like to once again thank SLYCAN Trust and UNU and everyone that joined in for this very fruitful session. We would be sort of preparing an outcomes article and posting it on our web pages. So yeah, we will share all of the outcomes of this event if you missed out on some part of it, or if you'd like to promote it within your networks. That would be fantastic as well. But yeah, with that, thank you so much, Vasita. Back to you, I guess.
Thank you very much, Riddhi. It's always a pleasure to work with the PCCB and the network. So a big thank you to everyone who joined us. Just to recap what we discussed, a few things, so we wrap up with a thing to follow up with when we go back. So we have a lot of capacity needs that were highlighted. Some are specific capacity needs, like data needs, capacity needs for like financial capacity needs, for scaling up capacities in institutions and among practitioners, as well as policy integration, cross-sectoral activities that need to happen, the capacity needs around this, and also the capacity needs to do the capacity needs assessment, which was highlighted as well. In addition to this, there were questions about examples on top of what was shared. So there was a question from Georgia about secondary displacement and whether there are examples of resilience building activities that have happened. And I had a question I asked also. I'm going to actually put it out to the others who are not in the group I was in, for networks and examples of networks and alliances and groups working on building capacities on human mobility. So having a list of those who could engage further in building capacities on this topic. And also as a follow-up of this discussion, we would send a summary of what you have shared, as well as link to the Miro board. So those who haven't added specific examples, who want to go back and add anything later, you have the time to do it. So we share the link. Please feel free to add any thoughts and inputs that you have missed on adding at the moment. A big thank you to the speakers. Thank you very much for joining us. You've been engaged in the previous discussions as well. So thank you for building on the discussions we've had and sharing all these experiences and lessons that you have learned with others as well. And a big thank you to the Unpccc, the PCCB, and our collaborator UNU in this session. So thank you very much. And I will end the session now and look forward to engaging with you again in a session like this or in person during COP27. Thank you very much.